Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 2 of the RCI radio podcast. My name is Ryan Gill. I'm going to be your host for today, and joining me for the second episode of this podcast is going to be Jesse Lee.
Yes, hello everybody, and we're back here with better mic levels and everything. Had a bit of a kerfuffle last week, but we figured it out.
Yeah, we have. Hopefully, Jesse is bearable for many of you now. We did have some nice feedback on the first episode, so hopefully we can get a lot of that addressed in this episode. But also joining us here, all the way from South Africa, is George Smith.
Good evening, Ryan. Good evening, Jesse. Good to be back with you guys. I kind of like how Ryan said people would be able to endure Jesse now. I think that's a topic we could discuss one of the podcast episodes, right, Jesse?
Yeah, sure. I mean, everybody, I think that's the correct term for me. I think bearable is what most people that have to deal with me have to say. But, with the new podcast and everything, and, we've obviously all three of us have worked together for a little bit of time now, but podcast is a bit different, isn't it, really? So, it kind of takes some time. And like Ryan said, thank you guys for all the feedback and everything. We didn't mean for my audio to sound like that. I knew that it would be an easy fix. And in fact, it was. We, after the edit was done, we knew exactly what we needed to fix. We did that, and hopefully smooth sailing from now on.
Well, you've just gone and jinxed everything now that you've said smooth sailing from now on. But
Why'd I do that?
But yeah, so before we get into today's topics, bit of a bi-weekly catch-up, some stuff that's been going on over the past couple of weeks since the first episode aired live. Of course, we had the return of Formula One. Of course, we'll get into that a little bit later on, as I think there's some very strong words all of us have for the first two Grand Prix, and one of the more important things, I think, for us especially, is we're recording this on Tuesday the 14th of July at the moment. Tomorrow is going to be, well, not tomorrow. When this comes out, it'll already have been out for almost a week, but GT4 is coming out tomorrow for us as we're recording this. Of course, we're going to have community races on that Wednesday evening and stuff, and there's been loads of amazing things kind of teased with the 1.5 update and that. I'm not sure if either of you were watching the streams, Jesse. Were you paying much attention?
No, I wasn't, unfortunately. Fill me in.
So they kind of ran a little GT4 launch event. Kunos, they had some of the guys from RD, some of the Kunos devs. They also had Jimmy Broadbent, some esports drivers, Jaroslav Honzik, and just some people from the community and all that to get together. Chris Hay was there as well. And in fact, Paul Jeffrey, our guest from 2 weeks ago on the first episode, he was actually there as well. And they just did a race around, I think it was Zolder, or Brands Hatch first and then Zolder in the GT4 cars, and it was a fun watch. And I'm guessing by George's Twitter posts, I'm guessing you were definitely watching at least someone's perspective, George.
Yeah, I definitely tuned in. I watched the actual vision broadcast of it, so it was pretty fun to tune in and see those GT4 cars. For me, it was something that I've been looking forward to, so I wasn't going to miss that. I saw the links being posted and decided I'd tune in. But I'm interested definitely to hear your feedback, Ryan, because I know that you and I aren't big fans of the Alpine, and it made me pretty sad to see it looks like a strong car.
I mean, I've never had a massive distaste for the Alpine. To me, the biggest thing that disappoints me about the Alpine is I believe it runs a Renault engine. And we'll get on to my opinions of Renault when we get on to Formula One later on. But I've never been a big fan of Renault. In fact, throughout my family's life period of owning cars, we've had 3 different Renault cars. One of them was good. The other 2 were absolutely trash.
So you're a bit biased.
I'm a bit biased. I'm a bit biased.
Yeah. I mean, Ryan, you didn't let me. I almost, the Alpine for me is just I hate the way that it
What
looks.
guys? Why do you hate it so much? I love the way that thing looks like a submarine from 1958. I love that car.
Jesse, I love the appearance. I actually think it looks really nice, and it's actually not too bad of a car. I mean, it did. I think it got onto a podium at Misano in the GT4 Euro 2019 season. But no, the biggest distaste that comes from me from that car is the engine that's running underneath it, which
Stop moaning about its engine when it looks like that. I'm sorry, we have to. I mean, there's going to be so much GT4 talk. I mean, I love the Maserati engine notes. For me, that car sounded incredible as well.
We're about to have a massive disagreement on Maserati here because I despise that manufacturer.
We made it 30 some minutes last time before we got into an argument. We made it 6 minutes this time, guys. Come on.
It's just the nature of our podcasts, but no, Maserati is a bit of a. I mean, I've said it before. I love Italian cars as much as the next guy. I mean, hell, Lamborghini and Ferrari are two of my most adored manufacturers ever, and we will get on to Ferrari as well. Funny enough, later on in this podcast. But no, I cannot stand Maserati. The level of quality that those cars that they give you in their road cars for what they cost is disgusting.
Ryan, I mean, you should just be a motoring journalist and just review cars, because I literally said I liked the engine notes of the Maserati in the GT4 update for ACC, our sim racing game, and you are on a tangent about the manufacturer and their rubbish road cars and
I like this. Last week it was me, and this week it's Ryan. I like this. This is George. What are you going to be complaining about next week?
Probably both of you.
Probably. But moving on from GT4 talk, because there's going to be a lot of stuff about GT4. We're going to be running a GT4 championship, actually, on the Monday that this podcast comes out. We're going to be having the first race of our GT4 championship. So that's relevant for something that's actually coming out or going to happen after the podcast airs. So if you're listening to this and you haven't signed yourself up already to the Monday GT4 Championship, get yourself signed up. It will be happening around 7:30 BST in the evening. And we've also got some multi-class stuff as well planned in the future. We've got a couple of events coming up as well regarding GT4. I think there's a GT4 Bathurst race going on this weekend, although that will have already happened by the time this podcast goes up. So we do have we do have quite a few things to talk about and to do with GT4, but we didn't quite get to the end of every topic that we had for last week. So I thought we would bring one of the big elephants of last week. We'll bring it into this week, and it's the title of the episode. Funny enough, has AMS2 lived up to the hype? Now, Automobilista 2 is obviously the latest game from Razer. Razer Studios obviously made Automobilista 1. They're using the Madness engine this time round, the engine that is used for Project Cars 1, 2, and I mean obviously 3 I would assume is going to use it as well. And there have been a lot of concerns over Automobilista 2. I've heard a lot of complaints. I've heard a lot of people saying that they were concerned about the content it would have at launch, and it has actually come out now. I think it's been out for 2 weeks. And George, I know you've had some experience with Automobilista 2. I was going to throw it to Jesse first, but I'll throw it to George first, because George, last week you were talking a bit with Paul Jeffrey off air. You've got some pretty strong opinions about AMS2.
Yeah, Ryan, to be honest with you, I do have strong opinions on most topics, to be honest. So, yeah, AMS2, I've played a little bit in its early phases, and I have only recently, and when I say recently, I mean just off air before this, tried to get into another sort of hosted session with a couple of my friends, which was something that I'll go into a little bit later on this rant. But to be honest, I think that, to answer your question, I don't think it has lived up to its hype. I think it was a little bit overhyped. I find that the release has been slightly early in terms of how it feels now to how it felt when I first played it. And I'm just talking from a navigating the menus and getting into a multiplayer lobby perspective. I haven't played the single player, and I have zero intention of ever doing that. So for me, it's going to be something that I would like to play online, against my friends and against whoever is going to be hosting lobbies. And that entire interface is still balked, and it's difficult to find lobbies. It's difficult to host them. It's not a fun experience in trying to do so. I spent longer getting in today than I got to spend in the sim. But with that said, the experience when I did get to actually drive it, we were driving the Ultimas on Kyalami, so my home circuit, something I was familiar with, and it felt pretty incredible. I really enjoyed it, and to be honest, I would like to give it a little bit more of a try, but I don't think that it's quite lived up to the hype that I was expecting it to really grab to me. I enjoyed AMS 1, not as an early player. I got it quite late in my sim career, and I enjoyed it for what it was. I put the graphics aside and just enjoyed the force feedback. And I feel that sort of side does come across in the new version, but yeah, it's got a way to go.
Yeah, I think, I mean, looking at the development, or the roadmap rather, for AMS2, whilst it was in its beta stage, I mean, you had the early release in March, and then of course there were a couple of updates in April, getting it up to the multiplayer, that kind of worked, and then of course, we've had some other stuff as well, like the Hockenheim ring has been brought, 90s DTM. One of the things I was especially disappointed to see was, and I'm not entirely sure if this is true now or if this has changed, because, like I said, I don't have AMS2, and George can probably correct me on this. Is it true, George, that it launched with no GT cars whatsoever?
Yeah, it's the car lists are quite different, and I think that's what's quite rewarding about AMS2. I don't necessarily miss the GT side of things. I don't think it's the niche that they're trying to fill. I mean, obviously Riser is trying to bring their Brazilian markets and the Brazilian racing side more to the sim community. It was very much what they did with AMS1. And I felt that the car listing that they did release in the early phases and things is not bad. I couldn't fault it on that. But if you are just sort of going over from ACC and expecting something similar to that, it's not going to give you that experience. But force feedback wise, I would say it does. I mean, it's certainly quite detailed, and I think that was something that was different for me about ACC, and I think it goes a long way in how force feedback works. Stronger is not always better, and you want finer details. I think people could go on about force feedback forever. I did find that my first ever experience in AMS2 felt better than my first experience in the early phases of ACC did. So I think they need to be treated independently of those two things. And if you're looking for a good GT sim, I think you would be wasting your time not going towards just going into ACC at this point.
Yeah, look, I'm just going to put my 2 cents in here. First of all, I can't tell if it's because you guys are connected to the British colonies or if I'm just an ingrate, but I would pronounce their name Riza. Is that incorrect? Is it Riza? Is that actually how you're supposed to pronounce that?
Yeah, it's Riser.
Yeah,
It's Riser.
I would say so, because Brazilian is, I mean, obviously Brazilian derives from Portuguese, which is a Latin language.
Okay, so Riza. Okay, Riza Studios. So I've been mislabeling them for the better part of a decade at this point, so my apologies to them. Here's the thing about Riza Studios, and this is their proven track record. Back when they were using the ISI motor, they released a product called, what was it, Stock Car Extreme, or maybe it was a product even before that, and it was solid but paper thin as far as content and choice would be concerned. And Ryza has always had the same MO. They want to popularize South American, specifically Brazilian motorsport, and it's something that not a lot of people see. Certainly, the first time I ever saw a Brazilian stock car, I liked it because again, I'm American. I love a car that is, basically a fiberglass shell on a roll cage that has like ridiculous sponsor stickers and liveries all over it. Reminded me a bit of NASCAR, honestly, except that they go left and right, which is really confusing to me. I don't understand why anybody would need to turn right. But I I loved that. The problem with that is, in the grand scheme of things, when you're making a simulator like this, is it is a niche market. The majority of people do want to drive GT3s around Spa. And that's a joke, but it's also the truth. Why is it so popular, GT3s at Spa? Ask yourself. Simple question, or simple answer rather. Because it is the most popular thing. It's one of the most popular tracks and the most popular cars, and that's what people want to do. It's the same way that if you play like an old NASCAR game. Why is Daytona so popular? Because it's the most popular track. It just is that way. Why is Monza one of the go-to places in ACC? Well, it's a meme, but it's also, it just is. It's the way it is. And whenever Ryza does these things, they do it to popularize their sport, their local sport. They're very passionate about that, and I think they do a really good job of that. My whole thing about them going to the Madness engine is I thought it was going to be a complete disaster. I didn't have any real expectations. I thought it was a bit silly. I was like, there's no way that they can use the Madness engine and tune that to something workable. I'm incorrect. They have done that. They've done that with Flying Colors. There's still some Madness engine weirdness going on. The AI is still a little bit weird. The curbs, though, which is a big thing for me with Project Cars 2, that's fixed as far as I can tell. That's not a big problem. Some of the cars still feel a little wonky, like they're not connected to the road. And I'm not sure why that is, but I know a lot of the Project Cars 2 cars had that problem where it just felt like you were on top of the racetrack instead of in it. And I imagine all of these things I mentioned, they will eventually fix. Because Automobilista was a long, long project. And if you go back to the beginning of it, it had bugs, it had problems, it had things that took them, in some cases, years to fix and perfect. I'm not interested right now in what AMS 2 is. We will revisit this in about 3 years, and I guarantee you it'll be a completely different game, sim at that point, and then I'll be interested in it. And I think that's their vision. I'm not talking to anybody specifically at the company, but based on their prior products that they put out, I would imagine that that's what they're doing. They're not focused on the now. They're focused on years in the future, because you can always guarantee they're going to stand by their product and support their product and update their product. So that's just how I feel. That's my 2 cents. Right now, is it a little janky in some spots? Yes. Is the menu system not great? Yes. But it's Ryzen, man. They will eventually get to it, and they will eventually make that a sim that every single sim racer has in their collection. You'll be made fun of for not having AMS2 in your library at some point.
I think the point George made actually is that it's probably launched in a better state than ACC did is quite an important one, because George mentioned in the first episode of the podcast that ACC was completely trounced on its beta, alpha release, whatever you want to call it, early access. You had, what was it, the Lamborghini at Nürburgring? That was
That
was the only thing that it shipped with for, it was something along the lines of £16, I think it was. I don't know the exact conversion in dollars or euros. But that's all it shipped with. And like George said 2 weeks ago, the curbs were monsters in early ACC. Even with the 1.0 release of ACC, the curbs were still problematic, and Kunos stuck to it and they fixed it, and like you said, you expect Ryza to do the same and stuff. One of the things that does concern me slightly is the future roadmap post-release that they have right now. So, AMS2 did not ship with Spa-Francorchamps, Silverstone, or Hockenheim. Those are 3 tracks that are currently confirmed to be individually sold or as part of the season pass, which you can buy to get some content for the rest of 2020 and possibly 2021 as well. So I think that's kind of a good value. But when you look at the tracks individually, you're looking at $10 per track if you just wanted one individual track. That's kind of verging on iRacing territory of a pricing model, should we say, compared to the likes of ACC, which, you know, is not... I mean, the ICGT pack for ACC is not that much more expensive than $10, and you get 4 incredibly well laser scanned and detailed circuits.
No, I feel you on that market. I think, these tracks, I'm not sure on the iRacing side if you get the different layouts. I know that you get the historical versions, obviously, with those 3 that you mentioned. I think that in the bigger picture, like I mentioned, I think Jesse's also sort of alluded to, is that Automobilist is sort of highlighting a completely different style of racing and a different continent entirely to what people normally are used to. So those sort of tracks, Silverstone, Spa, Hockenheim, you can drive in multiple sims, and it will become just a niche market at the end of the day to who wants to actually play those. I think most of the people will enjoy the base Brazilian style racing that they can get with tracks and layouts that you don't get anywhere else. And then, the few niche people will, cop up the $10 to, get these favorite circuits that they want. And maybe they just want Silverstone, and then that's $10 extra onto their purchase. I don't think it's too bad at this point from my perspective.
One thing I will point out to Ryan's point, I'm on the Steam page right now, and I think it's a bit ridiculous. It's we call it sticker shock. I don't know if that term translates it to other places in the world, but we would call it sticker shock. Like, to buy the Automobilista season pass for the 2020-2021 seasons, again, and it doesn't state is that 1 season pass or 2. I guess it really doesn't matter, but the point is that it's $100 US. If you buy it with the game, it's $126 US. We call that sticker shock. That is ridiculous for a game that sort of lacks content. What I would have liked them to have done is to have a more varied market strategy. And I hate to give Dirt 2.0 any props for anything, but the fact that they allowed you to buy this individual piece content and they had that laid out, or everything, or just a couple of the pieces, that's an interesting strategy. And guys, it works, because if you see $3.99, that you're likely, you're gonna sell more versions of that. And maybe that's something in the future that they'll deal with when they have DLC content to come out. But man, I'm telling you, anytime you see a video game price tag over $100, that's automatically going to turn people off. And if you go to bsimracing.com, they have a poll up there right now asking what their favorite sim is. Out of about 12 or 13 sims, AMS2's in dead last. Yes, I know it just came out, but it had a lot of hype. It is behind Forza. Let me just take a look. Yeah, it's behind Forza and Live for Speed, for God's sake. It is dead last, 1.37% at the time of this recording.
Can I ask you guys, what is your dollar price for AMS2? Just the base sim?
Obviously mine is over in British pounds.
Okay, let's do this. Convert your pounds into dollars. Let's do everything in dollars here for our resident American who won't want to change to...
Okay, so my value is 35 British pounds or $44.
Yeah. My base game is $41 or 690 odd rand.
Yeah, for me it's $40 plus tax, because we do not include tax automatically, so it would equal to right around $42, $43 to purchase.
So when Jesse, you were referencing like $1,000 price tag,
No,
$100 price tag, $100.
$126. Yeah.
Where just explain how $126 factors in here.
It's the season
Well,
pass. If you buy
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
season pass plus the game, it's 100 and
Well,
something.
no, it's worse than that. Just the season pass is $100, not
Oh,
the
that's
game.
crazy.
The season pass,
Just the season pass.
the season pass in British pounds is £80, which like if you add £35 onto that, you know you're looking at about £115, which I can tell you from personal experience. £115 is not the kind of money I'm gonna personally spend on a sim that, you know, I will be promised content in 2 years.
Can I give you guys like some context to this? So
Go for it.
my season pass here in South Africa costs us the equivalent of $32. So I mean,
Wait,
I'm not
what?
There's obviously been some pricing issues on Steam then for AMS too. I think everyone should go out and buy it in South Africa right now.
I'm gonna
Everybody
make
in
a
South
ZA
Africa,
account.
everyone in South Africa does own it. I mean, that was what our thing was going on. It was really well priced for the content that we got here. So that's I mean, that's just a perspective I'm giving, because to me, I don't get the overpriced vibe because that's not what I'm paying here.
I would say that is an incredibly reasonable, like £40 for a season pass for the next year or so. That's fine. My whole, if it was like that, I would have already have purchased the season pass. If it was priced at that, I'd say that's fantastic. My biggest thing though is the fact that it's a 2020-2021 version. I don't understand why they haven't broke that up. Why for the 2020 version just have it be 40 quid, you know, or whatever. 40 US dollars for a year. You can break it up. I mean, folks, there's a reason why Xbox Live Gold allows you to buy monthly, 3 months, 6 months, a year. It's because it works. You attract more customers that way with a lower price tag, even though in the long run it costs more. I mean, that's just how, economics work. And I would prefer them to do that. But to George's point, if it was that price, we wouldn't be having this conversation. If it was that price everywhere, we wouldn't be having that conversation.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a case of. I mean, I have seen it before, where in specific countries there are pricing differences of significant margins for certain games. I think it's specifically with Japanese games. There are very different values between Japan and, say, Europe and the West. So this might fall into one of those things where maybe, I mean, I don't mean to maybe come across as a bit brash or blunt here, but is it maybe because the South African economic state is maybe not as powerful as the likes of the US or Europe or the UK? Is that possibly a reason?
No, it sometimes we do get pricing deals where we do get benefit, like it just converts and it launches on our Steam page and it's different. Sometimes it's way overpriced to what it is in dollars on the US store, for example. So, there are some fluctuations that I've noticed with a couple of my friends on things, and I think this is definitely one of them. And I think I did talk about it with a fellow sim racer, Alaric Enslin, also known as LT. He pointed out, I think quite early on, at how well-priced AMS2 was coming out here, and I didn't quite pay attention to it enough. And talking to you guys now, I can really see the differences. It's quite incredible.
So the TLDR of that small segment is make yourself a South African Steam account and pay a slight international transfer fee to your bank to get a massive discount on a season pass for AMS2.
Man, I didn't think we would actually be giving solid, financial advice here, but don't do that, people. Don't do that. I think there's like a legal element to that, but there you go, though. A top tip by Ryan Gill.
Yes, follow at your own risk, I will say, but I mean, to maybe put it into a much more centralized light, obviously you said that, they're aiming to have a much more Brazilian focus on AMS2, because obviously they want to raise the awareness of the Brazilian series, and they do actually have some very interesting content in there. They have the Bathurst supercars, I believe, as well, or the Australian supercars, not the Bathurst supercars.
Yeah, the V8s, they're so much fun, and Adelaide is a circuit. No, there is a lot of content for, that variety side of racing, Ryan.
Yeah, I think like you said, George, the stuff they've started off with isn't bad inherently. But at the same time, I think obviously we don't know what pricing structure AMS2 Season Pass has in other countries. We're just taking it from the 3 countries that we represent. But for people outside of South Africa, I would say that AMS2 Season Pass definitely carries heavy weight to it. In the sense of, I don't see too many people committing to this Season Pass right now. I think a lot of people outside of South Africa will commit to the Season Pass in 6 to 8 months' time once they've seen the content come out.
Yeah, I think right now, whenever you're looking at a big price tag and if you look at the Steam page right now, you just see a logo of a couple of tracks that they are coming out with, and that's it. And that's not very pleasing to see. Anytime you spend money, you want to see where it's going to, and whenever you have nothing to base that on, then yeah, that's a bit of a problem as well. But again, to reiterate, my thing with them is quite simply, in a year or two from now, it's going to be hype. And at that point, computers will have advanced to the point where you could run it on a potato, I bet. We're right there where mid-range PCs can already run this fine at full settings. And in a few years, it'll be even better. So by the time that AMS comes into its own, I think the price will A, be down, and B, there'll be more people interested in it, and C, there's only one way to go from here, and it's up, honestly. It's not that it's bad. It's certainly, I think we all agree here, it's a lot better than Project Cars 2, right? We all agree about that?
As someone who hasn't played AMS2 and just going off what I've seen, I would say yes. But I would have to test it for myself to properly give a judge of that. But I think George can probably give a much better judgment of that.
I hated Project Cars 2. It just, to me, the way that the cars always just seem to self-correct themselves or point towards, like, you just couldn't really get any oversteer going without some weird physic trying to correct the car. It was very much like a railed sim racing game, and it didn't feel great to me. AMS2 doesn't have the identical sort of feel to that. I think there's so much more road feel out of things. You can really feel sort of the tires gripping up against the surface, and I think there's still a little bit of the residual railness to it. I feel like it's a little bit easier to drive. Once you get used to the braking points in the various cars and the brake pressure things that you need to set up and dial up, because all of that's quite weird in the setup side for the cars. Once you get past that, then I do feel that the cars do give you a little bit of leniency in how they drive. So I think there's a little element of Project Cars 2-ness to it. I think there are little issues with, like, right-clicking on a menu and that taking you back in the game is super frustrating. The amount of times you just get exited out of a lobby for right-clicking is, it was frustrating. I think those are things that may have been addressed now, but I have not been able to test. So those small little things that do translate over from Project Cars 2 are very much evident. Early on when you were getting track warnings and things like that, it was, the same graphical overlay that was in Project Cars 2. So although you were kind of experiencing something new, there was always something reminding you that there was some sort of inheritance going on between the two of them. And as it's come out now, yeah, I'm going to give it a little bit more time. I think it is better, to answer the question, Jesse. It's better for me. I've already enjoyed the driving in a little bit more than Project Cars 2. So it's a step in the right direction. I think you mentioned it. It's a sim that's going to go for the long haul. I mean, people still play AMS 1 to this day, and that's been out for ages. And I hope that it doesn't peak in 3 years, as you mentioned. I think that's a little bit late in when it needs to really hook its market. But yeah, I don't think as it is right now is a fair rating point from anyone's point of view. And you can throw time into it and give it a review right now, and in a day's time, those devs have probably done work that's going to change that outcome in a month's time. So as it stands now, better than Project Cars 2, decent content if you're from South Africa for the money, even without the season pass side. But hearing things from your perspective, a bit expensive maybe for other communities for something that's not quite polished yet.
Yeah, moving on to things not quite being polished yet and very rusty out of the box, we're going to move on to the next subject for today's podcast. We're going to talk about the 2 F1 Grand Prix that were held over the 2 weekends that we have had since the podcast aired. And of course, the first one we're going to dive right into is the Austrian GP. Now, I don't think I'm overstepping any boundaries by saying Formula One could not have had a better return Grand Prix than what we had at the Austrian Grand Prix.
Oh,
I would disagree.
No, I agree with Ryan on this, without a doubt. I think, look, all the issues that we have in the world today, with the coronavirus going around, and everybody's aware, or should be aware, and if you're not aware, make yourself aware of the ridiculous logistics problem that F1 fights every season. It is a marvel that we have it at all. And also, the way that things are now. We have to fight for our right to race now. Because of coronavirus, there's certain social distancing things that they have to account for. They have to have these plans in place. They have to have tests. They have to enforce these rules. The fact that it's July and we have a Formula One season, #blessed. Honestly, I'm just glad that we have it. My first thing of business isn't even about the race. And I love the black Mercedes overalls. I love them. I just love them. Go back to that. Stick with that now. Just do those now. They look so much better than those stupid off-white gray things with logos on them that looks like a patchwork quilt that you'd have made in home economics class. I love the black uniforms. It makes all the logos pop. I'm not a Lewis Hamilton fan. I'm just not. He looked sharp in that uniform. So did Bottas. But I know some people too, and I'm just going to get this out of the way. Some people go, oh, 3 safety cars. I don't like that. It's like, it's racing, man. Safety cars is racing. Things happen. You got to be safe about it. It bunches it up. And does it change the result? Yes. But it's racing. And that's how it's always been. Well, actually, that's not how it's always been, but that's how it should be. Safety, safety, safety. And also, the amount of people that complain about stuff like that boggles my mind. It's like you complain that F1's not close, but every time they rebunch them up to make them closer, you complain. So I don't really know what that's about. But congratulations to Bottas, first of all. And, Leclerc, a very close second. He was within 4 seconds. But also, because of the Lewis Hamilton penalty, Lando Norris got his first podium. And the first podium for, McLaren since 2014 or something like that. Like, hey, man, I'm not a Lando Norris fan either, but I also don't dislike him. Good for him.
McLaren did have a podium last year with Sainz at Brazil, but before that, it's the first podium that McLaren have had since Kevin Magnussen in Australia 2014. So part of that statistic is right.
I was more excited for it to start than I was for the entire race, and I'll be honest in saying that because, we kind of, to me, just Formula One it excites me to an extent, but I do feel that the racing on track doesn't quite deliver, and I think that the first Grand Prix back did, but it also highlighted that there's some big issues in the way that the grid is at the moment. So I think going forward, people can't just expect everything to kind of be like it was in the first Grand Prix a little bit more exciting. I think, yeah, it left me a little bit, I don't know, looking for more, I suppose, is the word I'd use. I just couldn't have JC saying Bottas's name as Botas for the rest of this podcast.
Well, we'll continuously remind Jesse about his American pronunciations that he has, just like Mike's favorite pronunciation of the Jaguar. And
no, you can't even say it incorrectly, you British people. It's I believe the Americans. Oh God, I haven't actually pronounced it like this in a while. Give me a second.
Jaguar.
It's a jaguar. It's like
No.
jag and then a wire. Jaguar. Oh God, that sounds so weird to say it like that. It is a jaguar.
He says Jaguar, so
No, it's jaguar.
For anyone who doesn't understand the context of this joke, go back and watch the RCI Welcome Back race, and you will hear Mike Jones pronouncing the Jaguar in such a strange pronunciation. Look, we'll leave it at that. You can go back and have a great laugh at it as much as you like, and maybe you can leave a comment down as well on that video and tell Mike Jones if you agree with his pronunciation or not. But keeping on the topic of Formula One, I think that I did say to some people that I wasn't particularly fussed if the racing was going to be good for the first Grand Prix back. I was just happy to have it back. I said people will forgive it for a poor race just because they'll be happy that it's back. And, I mean, Lando Norris, we have to talk about Lando Norris. I mean, he had so many doubts over him after last season. He had some poor results. He had some bad luck. He had some moments where people were doubting if he was 100% committed to being serious about Formula One. And he's come out in this first race of the season. Not only did he outqualify his teammate to put the car, was it third on the grid after Hamilton's post-quali penalty, but also to go out and on the final lap of the race, he put in the fastest lap, which, that kind of mentality to switch your mind into that mode of saying, I have to set the fastest lap. And he pretty much did have to set the fastest lap of the race to do it. He turned on an almost champion-like mentality. And I thought it was just amazing to see. I think the roar from people at home when Lando Norris crossed the line and he was within 5 seconds, I think, if there were spectators at the track, the roar would have been incredible. And it's a shame that obviously we couldn't have spectators at the track. Understandable why, completely. And, like Jesse said, it's great that we've managed to get the circuit and all the cars and everything, back on track and having a season. But I think that's one of those moments where you really wish there'd been fans there to see it.
Ryan, may I play devil's advocate for a second?
Go on.
Lando Norris did not actually finish on the podium, really, because of the penalty due to Lewis Hamilton. So, party spoiled.
I mean, he technically did finish on the podium because Hamilton had a 5-second penalty. It doesn't matter if he's ahead of him, Jesse.
Well,
Jesse, if you're gonna play Jesse, if you're gonna play devil's advocate, at least pick the topic like that. Only 11 cars finished the race, and it was very reminiscent of
George. This is why I like
90s
you.
Formula One.
This is why I like you, George. You point out the facts.
That's where I'd. Yeah, that's where I would go with things, and I'll be fully honest with you guys. I wasn't honest in why I said the opening race didn't have its impact like it should have. I'm a big Max Verstappen fan. I'm a big
here we
racing
go.
fan, and
oh no,
my team didn't have the best race, so I sulkingly didn't enjoy the whole Grand Prix, other than the fact that Lando, the champion, our sim racing champion. I love that sim racing has just claimed Lando now. That he's ours. Real life, right? He's a sim racer. I was happy with his results, and for that, there was a bit of excitement in it. If that had not happened, I wouldn't have even answered the question on the Grand Prix, really. But that's because of my bias towards being a big Max fan, and not a good result for Red Bull.
Yeah, it was a particularly disappointing weekend for the likes of Red Bull, with Max Verstappen's having an electrical suspension failure, I think it was, quite early on in the race. And I have to say that's a new one on me, electrical suspension failure. But Albon didn't have a great race either. He was looking really good, and full credit to Albon. He should have won that race. He had the pace to do it. He had the right tyres. He had enough laps to do it. I fully agree that Hamilton deserved the penalty. I'm not. I mean, I'm British, but I'm not the biggest Hamilton fan in the world. I still have a lot of respect for what he's done in terms of accomplishments and that, but I'm not his biggest fan. But I agree he was in the wrong. I agree he deserved a penalty. But I think at the same time, you can make the argument that Albon could have waited. He was a bit too impatient. And I think as much as Max Verstappen can come across as that sometimes, you kind of get the feeling Max Verstappen wouldn't have made that mistake.
I don't know. I don't think that. I'll go back with sort of Christian Horner's sort of same approach to answering that question, and say that the Mercs just had the straight line speed. The corners is where the opportunities were there for the Red Bull, and if you're not taking opportunities where you think you can, then you aren't pushing yourself to those limits. And I think the team was quite okay with him taking that sort of risk. And at the end of the day, that's who is important to keep okay with it. And we can say what we want, but Albon just taking those sort of steps in that direction is a good thing as a racing driver, and I think a good thing for Red Bull. You can't just sit back and just coach away and stay just a number two in the darkness and the shadows. He does want to also step up and show that he is capable of doing things. I mean, he accepts that he's the number two at Red Bull, but the fact that he's out there fighting is, for me, it's a good indication. I think there's good things to come from Albon in the future.
Yeah, he's certainly one of the more promising drivers, isn't he, really, if you look at it? I mean, we're so spoiled in F1 right now. A lot of sports are going through a renaissance right now where we see the next generation, and they're good. We have Lando Norris. We have Leclerc. We have Albon. And it's going to be amazing because, and I'm not trying to rush Lewis Hamilton, Vettel, and them out the door, but if you guys could go ahead and retire, that'd be great, because without a couple of these drivers that constantly take up the spotlight, I feel like the story every weekend would be about drivers like them. And imagine how interesting F1 would be if we were absent that the couple of giants that have been in the sport for more than a decade at this point. The future for F1, in my opinion, is the brightest it's looked in 20 years. And I don't know if you guys share that sentiment, but I can't wait for some of these older guys to retire or take an advisory role for a team or whatever, and to see the next generation, the young guns, if you will, step up and deliver, because they already are. I took a jab at Norris a second ago, but it's just a joke. It's like the man finished third because the other guy, Hamilton, he got a penalty. That's great. That's great for him. That's great for his team. That's great for brand
did you just hear how Jesse just destroyed the podium once again by just saying he finished third because the guy got a penalty?
Well, I like to be a contrarian. I was sort of kidding, but it's also true. I mean, it's like George, it's like winning a Miss America pageant and then finding out that you took bribes. You still technically won, but you disqualified yourself, so you're a loser. I'm not saying that Lewis Hamilton is a loser, but yes.
I think
I think we'll cut it. We'll cut it here. We'll cut it here before George goes absolutely livid. I think an interesting point on what you said there, Jesse, is that I agree. It's great to see all the young drivers coming up. Me as someone who's British nationality, I am so very excited to see all the young British talent coming through, the likes of Jack Aitken, George Russell, Lando Norris, and Callum Ilott especially as well. He took his first win in F2 in the first, I think it was in the Austrian Group GP for F2 or the Styrian GP. I'm not entirely sure which one. I don't follow F2 as much as I probably should, but yeah, it's amazing to see all the young talent coming through. But I think I don't want some of the older drivers, some of the veterans, to just be thrown out the door when, you know, we say, oh, look, they're coming up to 30 years old, we need to get them out of here now. You know, I think that a lot of them still have a place in the sport. I mean, Sebastian Vettel, who we'll get onto later when we talk about Ferrari, I'm going to be disappointed if he leaves the sport.
Really?
I think I am, because I think that he's an amazing guy around the paddock. If you hear the stories of, you know, the people that have met him around the paddock and stuff, and you know, he is one of those guys that appeals a lot to the fans. He's a really nice guy. He's really, you know, kind of down to earth. He doesn't have any social media. He keeps very, you know, to himself and all that sort of stuff. I mean, one of the things that he talked about, it was with Ted Kravitz in an interview once, is, you know, he goes back home and he restores old motorcycles and stuff. He's very down to earth. He's not a very flashy guy like Hamilton is, you know, go live the luxury life and all that sort of stuff. And I'm sure he has a nice house and everything, but he's very down to earth. And also, you know, with the likes of Kimi Räikkönen, I think Kimi, you know, could probably have moved on by now. But I thought the story when he was still at Ferrari, when he got that win at COTA, was incredible. The weight he'd had to go through between that win and his previous win, it was an amazing story, and it was great to see and stuff. And I think you kind of lose that when you replace the entire grid with a lot of 19 and 20-year-olds,
yeah,
and stuff like that. I think, you know, I'm sure, like, your point is not, okay, if you get to a certain age, get out. But I think that some of the older drivers still have a place in the sport, you know, when they're going to deliver, and we'll get on to older drivers coming back to the sport later on, actually.
We sure will.
But moving on, the Styrian GP, the not Austrian Grand Prix, even though it used the same hashtag Austrian Grand Prix. We're going to move on to the Styrian GP. Now, before we get onto this, I want to quickly touch on the qualifying. And I want to say that despite the fact that I have already said I'm not a massive Lewis Hamilton fan, I have to say that lap Hamilton pulled out for pole position was on another level.
Yeah, and it's almost, for Hamilton, it's almost like a little bit of redemption. He's had, in previous races in Austria, he's had some really terrible practice and qualifying sessions. He's parked it into the wall, looped it around a few times, bent up the car. So in a weird way, for me, you know, nobody touched on that fact, but it's sort of redemption to go out there and prove that, look, I can go out here and I can beat you guys when I want to, kind of thing. And I mean, that's sort of the Lewis Hamilton MO.
The Styrian Grand Prix, Hamilton had a great qualifying session in the wet. Max Verstappen, unfortunately, made a mistake on his lap, which meant that his lap time wasn't entirely representative at the end of qualifying. I do believe the times would have been much closer had Verstappen actually been able to finish that lap. But I still stand by what I say. Lewis Hamilton, amazing lap time that he pulled out in the wet. And I have to give credit to George Russell, who put the Williams 12th, I think it was, and then up to 11th after Leclerc's post-quali penalty?
Yeah, I think you're right on that. Styrian Grand Prix for me was a little bit more boring than the previous week's one. And this time around, I honestly fell asleep in the middle of it. And I woke up and I got to catch the end of it. And the end was really exciting. So to me, I think I caught the exciting parts of the Grand Prix, especially with Perez and his damaged car and having to lose yet again to Lando Norris on that final lap, and Lando just smashing it out. He's kind of making a name for himself in those the last lap Lando sort of vibes. So yeah, please don't hate me for falling asleep in the middle. Like, it just that was just how it was for me.
Yeah, as a Ferrari fan, and don't get it wrong, I'm a fan of about half the teams on the grid.
How does
But
that work?
how does that work? Well, I load the gun with half bullets and hope that one of the bullets crosses the line first. But no,
I could never watch sport with someone like Jesse, or Formula One with
well,
someone like
no, I
Jesse.
have favorites over other ones. It's just that half the grid I appreciate and half the grid I think are well, I'm not gonna say, but they're not.
I kind of get where Jesse's coming from. I mean, like I said, I'm not the biggest Lewis Hamilton fan in the world, but I will still, be kind of pleased if he does well. I won't I'm not going to boo him if he wins a race or anything.
I mean, I wouldn't expect you to boo anyone, Ryan, with your lovely nature and personality. So, that would be sort of...
Well, we'll get onto that later. Yeah, I mean, for example, I don't think either of you two probably know which driver I support in Formula One, but I'm tempted to give you each a shot. I'll let Jesse go first.
Oh, okay. Go ahead and allow me to ask one question. It's not a British driver, is it?
No.
Is it Kimi Räikkönen?
No, it is not.
Huh. Okay, because legitimately, Kimi Räikkönen is like my near tippy top for favorite drivers all time.
He is amazing. He is amazing. I will give you that much. But I'm interested to see what George's guess will be.
Ryan being Mr. Controversial, yeah, obviously he's a big Lance Stroll fan, but I would probably maybe go towards Carlos Sainz.
That's a good guess. It's a very good guess, and I could probably guess why you've picked Carlos Sainz. Does it have anything to do with the fact that I used to live in Spain by chance, George?
Oh my God! I didn't read the writing on the wall.
It's 100% the reason that I chose Carlos Sainz.
Okay, well, I could be really glad in telling you that it's not Carlos Sainz then, and it's not Lance Stroll either.
Oh my God! You just Shyamalan twisted us on that one. I was all ready for it to be Sainz.
No, actually, my favorite driver actually currently drives for a manufacturer I despise.
Daniel Ricciardo. It has to be Ricciardo.
It is Daniel Ricciardo. I love Ricciardo so much. And
yes, okay.
When he moved to Renault, I was so disappointed because I don't like Renault at all. We had a brief discussion on this earlier. I don't like Renault.
It wasn't even brief. It was not even brief.
And I am super happy that he's moving to McLaren to partner Lando Norris next season for 2021. I think that is going to be one of the most hilarious partnerships in Formula One's history. As teammates, and I can actually go out and buy Daniel Ricciardo merch now that doesn't have that disgusting Renault badge on it.
All right. Well, welcome to the RCI podcast where Ryan loses one brand deal at a time. No,
the best part is that one of the sponsors on the side of the Renault cars in F1 is RCI. So
yeah, it is not.
It all
us.
comes together.
It is not us, but it is. There is
Jesse,
an RCI logo on the car.
I mean, we could pretend that it's because Ryan hates them that they put it on there.
Let's not get into Renault sponsorship opportunities here because, look, times are tough at the moment, but I don't want to know what my answer would be to that.
I mailed Renault $1 once and they put my name on the car. No, so my whole thing of the race was very simply the Ferraris hit each other, immediately realized that Hamilton had got away and he was doing Hamilton things. It's not a knock on him, not a knock on Mercedes. I get it. They're a really robust team. They have no equal, and they have not had an equal in quite some time. Ferrari is trying to very quickly put their upgrades that they had for, I think, Hungary already on the car, and they completely botched the race. They botched qualifying. They botched the entire two-race weekend, in my opinion, despite the fact that Leclerc finished second in the Austrian Grand Prix. And it's just you've wasted your time and your money at this point, and now added all of that, you look a little silly in the eyes of everybody else. And that was my story from the race. It was quite a snoozer. After that, I'm in George's camp with that. I didn't fall asleep. I just sort of walked away and did more productive things because, unfortunately, the second race in Austria was not as good as far as competition-wise as the first.
But moving on from the Styrian GP, we had quite a lot of news regarding F1 in the build-up to the Styrian GP. And I think the biggest piece of news that we've had building up to the Styrian GP and now going into next season is the return of a particular Spaniard. You might know him. He's raced for Toyota a couple of times. He's won Le Mans. He's a two-time Formula One world champion, so he's kind of a big deal. Not really, though. And it's Fernando Alonso, obviously returning to Renault for 2021 to partner Esteban Ocon. Now, before I get onto my thoughts about this, I want to throw this to Jesse, Mr. All About the Youth, All About Younger Drivers. What's your thoughts on Fernando Alonso coming back to Formula One with Renault in particular?
Well, here's the thing. He has a long-standing history with Renault, obviously, and just thinking about how long ago I heard his name driving for Renault reminded me just how old I am. And I think he started like 2003, 2004 with them, and he won some titles, and then he also had a second stint in the late noughties, and now he's back again. As far as I'm aware, he's the only F1 driver to ever do that. And I think that's awesome, personally. And I also think that his return's based on the fact that the Toyota program in WEC is shutting down / changing, whatever that case may be. And, you got to eat, so you got to go somewhere and naturally go back to Formula One. But my thing about him is he's a natural leader in F1. He's the same as some of the other veterans. I'm a bit surprised that he's coming back. I'm surprised that he didn't go into more rally, because obviously we know he did the Dakar rally. I think he finished 13th, and which is nothing to shake a stick at, by the way. But he's shown that he can win in anything. He is a natural talent. He's a great guy. He's also a funny guy. Whenever he was becoming the Fernando Alonso beach chair meme guy, he owned that. He did it several more times. It was funny. He's a man of the people, so to speak, and he's a competitor. F1 needs people like him. I have no idea exactly how old he is, but it will be interesting to see just what he can accomplish. I mean, it's been a long, long time since he was actually relevant in Formula One. We'll see if he can get back to that, but I just hope that maybe he doesn't embarrass himself, I think, is what I'm going to end with, George.
Jesse, before I start, I just want to ask you, did you say that he's like the only F1 driver to make a return?
No. So he's
I
had...
misunderstand what you're saying.
Yeah, so he will have, when he returns next year, he will have driven for the same team 3 different times with a gap in between, okay? As far as I'm aware, nobody else has ever done that. He'll be the first one in F1 history to have done that.
Oh, yeah, because he left. Okay. He joined McLaren and then he left McLaren, didn't he?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
he did.
Yeah, okay, yep, that's right. Yeah, the facts check out now. 38, by the way, is his age, because Jesse was asking.
Get him a walker. Jesus Christ.
I mean, yeah, I'm not one of those big Alonso fanboys in my camp. It's it's cool to see big names coming back to things. I think the worry about fall from grace is always going to be there. Like, will he have the impact that he had before, and will it be something that's worthwhile for him to pursue? I mean, he is a racing driver through and through, and when it comes down to it, he's gone and dabbled in so many different aspects of motor racing, but it is his home sort of is an F1 car, and I think single seaters is where he's really excelled in things. So for me, I think that it's cool to see that drivers don't just throw the towel in when they pass the age of 35, which is pretty young in the scheme of life. But when it gets into sporting sides of things, you start to doubt people, I suppose. But yeah, coming back in and being able to reintegrate with your old team, I think that shows a lot about the way that he's obviously handled his business side, and we can respect him as a business person on that aspect. A lot of people burn bridges when they leave things, and clearly Alonso has managed to work something in his favor along the lines of what he's managed to do. I mean, he's put himself into seats and been able to drive wherever he's wanted to go, really. So, you gotta tip your hat to someone that's like that. People know how hard it is to make it in racing, and in the bigger picture, being able to reintegrate into the current F1 scenario will be interesting to see how he adapts. And I think that Ocon pairing up against him is going to really push him to make sure that he's not going to fall back on what he wants to succeed and prove to everybody here, because that's going to be the biggest thing. Is there's naysayers and haters make you prove them wrong, and I think Alonso has always been that kind of a chap.
I think that going into 2021, realistically, if there's anyone that could potentially drag that Renault car onto a podium the way that Lando Norris has managed to do for the McLaren car, it's going to be someone of the caliber of Fernando Alonso. So I think, he can definitely bring a level of quality that, not many other people on the grid can match. I did see a lot of complaints that people were disappointed not to see a Renault Youth Academy driver. I think a lot of people are kind of missing the point that, or kind of forgetting that, I think it's Guan Yu Zhou, the F2 Renault Academy driver at the moment, he doesn't actually have enough super license points to get a full-time F1 drive. And I've heard that he should have enough by the end of the F2 season, but it depends on his results. He was a bit unlucky, I think, in the first F2 race. He had some form of mechanical problem. But I think he still hasn't won a race in F2, so I think he's still kind of unproven in a way. Jack Aitken, a lot of people mentioned his name. He's already left Renault. He left the Renault Youth Academy. He's a Williams reserve driver now. He's still racing in F2. And I think if he'd stayed at Renault, he probably would have been given that drive. I genuinely think he would have been given that drive, but whether he left or they dropped him is something I don't think has been fully covered yet. I don't think anyone fully knows the true story behind that one, but his name was thrown around, and I think, someone said, well, why not Sebastian Vettel? And I think Sebastian Vettel is probably looking at Renault right now and going, I don't even know if they're going to be in the sport in 2 years' time, because there's been a lot of talk of Renault pulling out of the sport after they've invested £1 billion into their F1 program with no return yet. They've had no podiums since that investment. So I think with Renault at the moment, their driver choices were limited, and I think, like you said, I agree with George. I'm not the biggest Alonso fan, and like Jesse said, he kind of became a bit of a meme guy, and he kind of embraced that as well. And I'll be happy to see him back on the grid, but at the same time, I'm not the most excited about him returning to grid. But I do think of the options Renault had available right now, probably the best option.
Yeah, and just one thing I want to touch on real quick. I made a comment earlier about, the youth and the sport, and it's exciting. And I think some of the old guard, as they get pushed out, we'll see more of the new shine through and all that. I in no way want to push all the veterans out, because for reasons Ryan stated earlier, most of the character and the honor and the prestige come from the older guys that have won tons of Grand Prix. And Kimi Räikkönen is an example that I use most of the time for that. I love having him around and on the grid. But one other thing about Alonso is I'm also not the biggest Alonso fan. The happiest time for me with Alonso was when he drove a red car. But other than that, he's got 32 wins. And I was just reading over his press release from his return. He's focused on the future, making him better. And I think that's the point, guys. That's the point. It is awesome to have that young youth and talent on a team, pair that with a veteran, have them learn off of each other, make them push each other. And I think that really works. But that also can go bad if, respect doesn't go both ways, which I think we're seeing on some teams right now.
Yeah, I think with Alonso it is kind of a double-edged sword situation where we know what he's been like in the past. He's been very vocal of the Honda engine from his time at McLaren. and and he can work against you as much as he can work for you. And if that Renault car doesn't improve, the world's going to know, because Alonso's going to tell you over the radio. So I think Renault, I think they know what they're getting themselves into, though. I don't think they're going to be shocked if he says anything like that over the radio. I mean, I don't think when they entered contract negotiations, if they had anything in the contract saying you can't talk bad about the Renault engine over the radio, Alonso's probably looking at that and going, you don't really know who I am then. So, I think Renault know where they stand. I think they know that it's in their best interest for now to keep Alonso on their side. And I think realistically, Alonso's only going to be there for 2 to 3 years maximum. And I say 2 to 3 years maximum. Probably 1 to 2 years, more likely.
Yeah, I don't see many teams keeping a 40-plus-year-old driver in the seat when they have a 20-year-old driver who can go to F2 and can win races and stuff like that. I don't see that either. I think Renault need Alonso right now, and this is going to be my final word on this. I think they need him. They need that veteran in there that, like Ryan said, will tell them when they're doing wrong or messing up or when something isn't right, because Spanish people, not to generalize, but Spanish people typically, they have that quality of like, look, if something's wrong, I'm going to tell you about it. And I personally respect that quality. I admire that transparency. And I think that's part of the reason that Alonso has been endeared to me over the years, is because he is like that. But I agree with you, Ryan. He's only going to be there for a few years in my mind. He's there to set up the next generation car and to help them get through testing and hopefully help them get back to the podium.
Yeah, speaking of getting back to the podium, let's move on to something that George was desperate for us to talk about, and I did promise we would get into this. Ferrari. Well, where do we start with this? Well, first of all, there was preseason testing, which, for Ferrari went, kind of under the radar a bit. They weren't terribly impressive like they were the previous season, but they weren't terrible either. And we were told at preseason testing that Ferrari were interested in pursuing a contract with Sebastian Vettel and that talks would open recently. Fast forward through all the COVID, and we get to the Austrian Grand Prix. Sebastian Vettel comes out in an interview and says he was never offered a contract. He was actually told over the phone that they didn't need his services anymore and that they didn't want him to re-sign with the team. So that was already a big red flag to say, okay, things are going on at Ferrari. Carlos Sainz has now decided he's joining the team. I think it's a good signing, by the way. Just a little note on that. I think Carlos Sainz is a good pickup. However, things haven't started well. They did not look good at the Austrian Grand Prix, and Leclerc was very, very lucky to get a podium, in my opinion. That podium was probably not deserved considering their pace, but you make the most of your opportunities. They got on the podium. And the Styrian Grand Prix. The more and more I see that lunge from Leclerc, the more I think back to Fabian Schmidberger, who's one of our stewards. The more and more I think of how much he hates the Senna quote. If you no longer go for a gap, you're not a racing driver. I have to be honest, the gap that Leclerc was going for was gone before it even appeared. And I honestly don't understand what he saw, how he saw this move working out, but it did result in a double DNF for Ferrari. And the Styrian Grand Prix in the wet was one of Ferrari's worst qualifying sessions in a long, long time. Now, Jesse said before, they fast-tracked some upgrades. They got a new floor and a new front wing upgrade to the Styrian Grand Prix because they were concerned after the Austrian Grand Prix, and you would be. But honestly, the upgrades didn't look like they did much in the wet, and maybe it's just that the Ferrari car doesn't perform very well in the wet, but they weren't, for the half a lap we saw them, Sebastian Vettel got a bit of a bad start, and obviously from there you know the whole story, so we didn't really get to see them perform with the new upgrades in the dry, but they weren't terribly impressive in practice either. They are now going to the Hungaroring. They're going to have a chassis upgrade coming at the Hungaroring, and the only thing that fills my mind about Ferrari is this chassis upgrade better be good, because if it's not, they are in for a world of hurt for the rest of this season and next season.
Yeah, I don't care if it was raining. I don't care if it was snowing. There is no reason why a prancing horse badged car should be qualifying 10th and 14th for a Grand Prix. I don't care. There's no excuse for that. If you're a front of the grid kind of team, which Ferrari clearly isn't at this point, and again, folks, this pains me to say all this. I'm a Ferrari fan. Don't like Mercedes. I love Ferrari. But I'm also a realist. I keep it real. So there's no reason why a quote front of the grid team should qualify that poorly at all, regardless. You should be able to qualify at least in the first 3 rows on pace, regardless of what the conditions is. I don't care if they turn gravity off, but which actually would make a more interesting race than this year in Grand Prix, but that's neither here nor there. The, they're going through some internal struggles. Okay, they're not going to have Vettel back. Vettel's driving there. I assume he's looking for a ride, or maybe he's already been cherry picked. We won't know for some time. We don't know what his plans are. We don't know what's going through Leclerc's mind. There's a kerfuffle in R&D. There was the COVID thing. None of this helped Ferrari. And the one silver lining to them was like, oh, well, we're going to fast track some upgrades and put them on the car. And what do they do when the green flag drops? They crash into each other and retire and cannot get any data. Folks, there's no more testing. They're going in blind now to the next race. That race was supposed to be their test session. It is literally loading a gun and shooting yourself in the foot over and over again, going, ow, that hurts. That is what Ferrari's doing. And I'm sorry to be blunt about it, but it's absolute stupidity from one of the perceived best teams in motor racing. And it's hard to watch.
I think you guys have pretty much summarized everything pretty detailed about the Ferrari woes. I can't really add too much more in terms of feelings on things without repeating what both my co-hosts have said here. Because, yeah, I'm not a big Ferrari fan at all, so seeing them performing badly doesn't upset me. It more gives me a little bit of ammo on some of my Ferrari fanboy, chats that I've had with some big Ferrari fans. I've always found it to be an interesting dynamic that Ferrari is paid the most and should really be utilizing their budget the best. And at this current stage is being beaten by teams with very limited budgets and not really being able to afford the luxuries that Ferrari has. I think Charles Leclerc maybe got a bit of a wake-up call after the Styrian Grand Prix, purely because, yeah, you go from superstar and finding a podium the week before and then being the man that sort of ruins what your team is trying to build up. And that's a big oopsies for Leclerc, and he's a youngster. Mistakes happen. That gap was never there. I took a lot of brash comments from people as a Max Verstappen fan during his Crashstappen phase, and it's that youth. It's something on the grid. Should never have done it, and I think is already paid the price for it from his team's reactions to things, and don't really have more to add. But Ferrari should pick themselves up for sure, and well, to me, I don't really care if they do or they don't. For the Ferrari fans, they do. But for me, as someone that's sort of seen their rise in Formula One and then their sort of crash down here, it's not the worst narrative, for the Formula One story in the bigger picture, to allow some other teams to get a bit of exposure.
I think Jesse kind of put it really well when he said it's like shooting yourself in the foot. I get the feeling Ferrari have been doing this for the last 4 years now, that they've had opportunities, they've had years in which they had a car on pace with Mercedes, or arguably a better car than Mercedes for at least half the season, and they've thrown away the opportunity for a championship. The last time Ferrari won a driver's championship was 2007, I think it was, with Kimi Raikkonen, and then I think the last time they won a constructors was 2008, because that was the year that Hamilton beat Massa to the title on the final lap. But if we're looking at constructor standings alone, Ferrari are coming into this year pretty much acknowledging they're not going to win a constructors title. It's going to be 12 years since the most successful team in Formula One history has won a constructors title. And I watched the Formula One with my family, and my dad kind of made a little bit of a snarky joke at Ferrari. He said, if anyone follows the Premier League, they'll understand this joke. They said they're doing a Liverpool. They're going to try and go 30 years without winning a title. And it kind of feels like that at the moment. They just continuously keep making mistakes at the critical moments, and this time it doesn't even feel like they're making mistakes at critical moments. This kind of just feels like a bunch of people that, to quote Alonso, they look like amateurs. They really do right now. Williams have a third of Ferrari's budget, and George Russell out-qualified Sebastian Vettel. He out-qualified Charles Leclerc, in the wet. That should never be happening. Realistically, with a team that has triple the budget of a team at the back of the grid, that realistically shouldn't be happening. Obviously, it's a bit more complicated than just who has the most money. You have to do something with that money, and clearly Ferrari haven't done the correct thing with that money. And I think, with how limited it's going to be next year, considering that this year's cars are going to be brought into next year. You don't develop a brand new car for next season. You bring over this year's cars into next year, and you have a limited amount of upgrades you can perform onto the car. I think it's one big upgrade, so that would be something like a chassis modification, or it would be two smaller upgrades, like certain bargeboard elements or rear wing designs and stuff like that. Ferrari are going to be very limited over this year and next year as to how much they can develop this car. And like I said before, unless this chassis update at Hungaroring is very, very good and it completely changes the car, it's not just this year they're going to struggle, it's going to be next year as well. And they're going to be hoping that these 2022 regulations fall in favour with them, because if not, they're going to be looking at a long time without a title.
Yeah. It is an incredibly complex situation, and we are generalizing, but I'm going to make one more statement that just sort of sums it up. Ferrari right now, the F1 team, they are in the middle of being grossly mismanaged, and it doesn't have to be that way. It just turns out that it is that way, and that's unfortunate. Hopefully they can turn it around. But hey, sticking with the theme of Ferrari, we get to go to sort of home field advantage for them, don't we, Ryan?
Yes, we do, actually, Jesse. Very nice segue there. We go into the last topic of today's podcast, which is calendar updates for Formula One. Now, there's a bit of excitement and a bit of, oh god, why, in this update, because we have had the announcement that Mugello will be hosting its first ever Formula One Grand Prix, and it will actually be Ferrari's 1000th race, which is kind of exciting. Don't think they'll win it, though, unfortunately, especially considering how things have gone so far this season. This is a track
maybe
I'm
they could just
with.
maybe they could just try finish. That would be a win.
Maybe so. I'm
this
quite
all
familiar.
hurts me as a Ferrari fan.
I'm quite familiar with this circuit as a MotoGP fan. This is quite an exciting circuit for MotoGP racing. I think the F1 cars overtaking will be a bit tricky around here. It's not the best track for overtaking with F1 cars, although we can say that about a lot of circuits in this modern era of Formula One. But it does have the big, massive start-finish straight in quotation marks. It's not exactly straight. But Mugello's an exciting track, and watching qualifying around there is going to be absolutely phenomenal. The other piece of news is Sochi's also on the calendar.
Yeah, it's interesting how Sochi got back on there. With all things considered, I wonder what the logistics of that is. Why that was something that was added. I guess because it's there. I want to go back to Mugello for a second. I did not realize that I forget the actual grading that they call it, but was it like grade A or grade 1, whatever it is? I didn't realize. Mugello was actually that grade. I was under the impression that it was a lesser circuit, but either way, I got to tell you, my experience with Mugello started in sim racing years and years ago now, and I've raced cars and bikes on the thing. I love the track. I think you're gonna be hard pressed to find somebody that doesn't. I think Mugello is the anti Paul Ricard, where if you mention Paul Ricard, everybody reacts in disgust. You mention Mugello, everyone perks up. They enjoy it. I enjoy it. I've had some bad races there, but I've certainly had a lot of close battles there. I think it lends itself to that. I think you're going to see a lot of F1 cars driving in dirty air around here because there is no chicanes per se. Every corner is a sweeping corner. Even the three hairpins on this track are banked sweeping corners. I believe Paul DeResta said he theorizes that the drivers will go no lower than fourth gear on the circuit. That's incredible. You're only going to be using half the gearbox around this joint.
Yeah, I think Mugello is definitely going to be an interesting circuit. It'll probably be quite unique in as you say, Jesse, he doubts they'll go below fourth gear around here. Maybe they will tone down into third at some point through one of the sections. But yeah, like you said, it's going to be interesting. How entertaining it is for racing is yet to be seen. But hopefully it will be good. Just to touch on Sochi, like you said, not entirely sure how Sochi's ended up back on the calendar, but I think we all kind of had the same opinion of Sochi, which is like, oh, Sochi's on the calendar again. Yep, that pretty much sums up the level of excitement about Sochi. It's not a very entertaining track. I think the initial design of the idea that it's a track that goes around the Olympic Park in Russia is a very cool idea. I just think the way they've done it is not very good. And, there are better ways to build a circuit. There are better ways to build a street circuit, in quotation marks. I hesitate to call it a street circuit because only one road on that track is actually used as street. There's only like one stretch of road that's actually part of the street around the Olympic Park. The rest of it is off limits year round.
I believe they call that a semi-permanent circuit in that case. But even still, I agree with you. I'm just going to echo what you said. I hate it because the whole course is built like a street circuit, though most of it's permanent. And I hate that. It just feels forced, I guess. But my only word on Sochi is this. Anytime we go to Sochi, I don't hate it. I don't love it. I'm indifferent. It's just one of the faces in the crowd to me.
I mean, I don't think anyone really even likes the Sochi Grand Prix. Even journalists and things, if you listen to podcasts, are not super excited to head over for that. So, I don't think they'll be upset that they don't have to fly out and they can sort of observe from their social distancing or whatever methods they're communicating. Do they, do journalists and stuff even get to go to events now, or do they tune in from...
They actually do. Ted Kravitz, if anyone has access to Sky Sports, which I know there's lots of controversy about Sky Sports having exclusive rights in the UK and all that, but if anyone has access to Sky Sports, you'll know that Ted Kravitz does a section called the Notebook, and he would usually walk through the paddock and go over the weekend as a whole and the results for each driver's race. And he did it for this weekend, but he was actually on the start-finish straight for the circuit because the journalists are not allowed in the paddock. Each team has a photographer to take photos and stuff, but those photographers cannot go into other garages. They can only go into the specified team that they are taking pictures for and all sorts of stuff. And all the media and all the journalists are actually grouped up into one big building, or at least they were in Austria. They were grouped up into the media building because everyone's kind of in their own bubbles to make sure that there's as little contact between people as possible. And there's a great explanation on how it's all worked, and it's a really good watch. It might even be on the Sky Sports YouTube channel at some point. They might re-upload it. I'm not entirely sure. But he has a good talk about how it's all been planned and that, and it's actually really, really amazing. But yeah, the journalists and that, they are there. They're all grouped into one building. kind of thing, which to me it's kind of a bit amusing. The teams and the drivers always moan about how they hate the journalists and all that, and now they finally got rid of them and they've thrown them all into one big building. They've locked them in for the weekend. So,
I think that's some of the drivers' like biggest fantasy they had. Like if they had like a genie lamp, that would be like their number one wish. So hey, they got that one for free. I never considered that, Ryan, but hey, dream come true.
Yeah, so the journalists are obviously still there to an extent. Obviously, interviews are conducted from a social distance to ensure that there's no risk of spreading the coronavirus. In fact, it was the podium. I'm not sure if you guys saw the podium celebrations of the Styrian Grand Prix, where they had the little Amazon box robots moving along to present the trophy to the drivers. It's the Amazon warehouse kind of robots to do that. I thought that was absolutely hilarious, and there were quite a few memes made about the fact that the Ferrari F1 car is the one powering those robots because of how slow they moved.
Here we go.
But despite the memes, the journalists are still there. They're all locked into one building, so they're still going to have to fly out, unfortunately. But to be honest, personally, I think you could probably just do all the journalism cover you needed from the comfort of your own home if you didn't need to do any interviews with anyone, because, to be honest, I don't think you're really missing anything out there.
Yeah, here in America, we have an eloquent way to do driver interviews via social distancing. We put the microphone, the standard microphone, on a 6-foot stick, and you have a key grip or a boom operator, a second one, who just kind of puts it in the driver's face, and the person conducting the interview just sort of yells a bit louder so that they can hear them. And that's how we've been doing it for IMSA and NASCAR and IndyCar here in the States. So it's actually quite comical when they get that wide shot and it's just a man with a 6-foot pole with a mic on the end of it.
Yeah, so with that done, we've come to the end of the topics for today's episode. I would like to just say a thanks to Jesse and George for joining me here today. Obviously, Twitter handles for all three of us are on screen if you're on YouTube, and if you're on Spotify or iTunes when this eventually comes to Spotify and iTunes, because we're still waiting for confirmation from both of those that we can upload to that platform. You'll be able to find those in the little notes section as well for that. And we're going to be looking to put it up on some other platforms as well. I think Google has their own platform for uploading podcasts, so we'll look into uploading that on there as well. But apart from that, leave us some feedback below. What do you think we've done better this episode? What do you think we could still improve on in the future? And all sorts of stuff. We love to get your feedback. Of course, it's the only way we can improve realistically. So, yeah, we love to get it. And the next time that you guys hear us, it will be in 2 weeks' time for another episode of the podcast. We'll be covering the Hungarian Grand Prix, which is happening. Will have happened by the time this podcast comes out. So if any juicy action happens in the Hungarian Grand Prix, don't worry, we will be discussing it. We'll also be discussing GT4, the ACC GT4 DLC in the next podcast as well, because of course that's something that is very relevant to us. And we'll also be covering some of the stuff happening in Racing Club International in terms of events and the future of the community as well. So if any of those things interest you, you can feel free to join us again in 2 weeks' time. Thank you very much to Jesse Lee and George Smith for joining me here today. I have been Ryan Gill. I've been your host for the podcast, and we will catch you in 2 weeks' time for episode 3. Have a great day.